Good afternoon, everyone. I think we all met before, and I'm back on stage again with Professor Colleen Ward. This morning, I'm going to cut to the chase here. This morning, we had an interesting question posed to Sir Mark Solomon. Is New Zealand a multicultural or bicultural country? And I know in the past, many years ago as a civil servant, this sort of question wasn't something you could ask easily because it was like a clangor in the room, something you just don't raise. But it's very important we have these sorts of debates. And the topic of multiculturalism has been around for a while. And recently, in countries such as Germany and France, the leaders of state of those countries have said that multiculturalism has failed. And other people say, well, there never was multiculturalism in Germany and France, so how could it have failed? In New Zealand, as our population is becoming more diverse, that question has been posed as well. And we know that the Federation of Multicultural Councils, for example, as one organization, has raised the topic of multiculturalism, you know, the debate of whether we need such a framework in this country or not. So I thank the person who asked the question on multiculturalism for actually kicking off this session a little bit early, which is really helpful. So today, we're going to explore that very thorny topic of multiculturalism. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Do we really need one at all? And I have an expert here with me, Professor Colleen Ward, as I said before. I'll tell you a little bit about her. She's the co-director for the Center for Applied Cross-Cultural Research at Victoria University. And many of you might have met Colleen before or seen her speak. She has written many papers on issues related to ethnic diversity, and we certainly are very pleased to have her here. A little bit about her. She's a migrant to New Zealand herself. She was born in the amazing city of New Orleans. It's a city I've always wanted to go to myself, Colleen. She has lived in a great number of countries before coming here, so has first-hand experience with cross-cultural exchanges. She lived in England, Trinidad, where she was an ethnic minority person herself, Malaysia, Singapore, and then she moved to Christchurch, and she had a stint overseas and came back again. I know Professor Ward is a real All Blacks fan, and it's something that Minister Hawkins, in her internal affairs citizenship ceremony, said that that's something that all Kiwis have an obligation to do, is to support the All Blacks. So I know Colleen's an ardent fan. So Professor Ward, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you here. The topic of multiculturalism has really big implications for migrants and refugees in this country. And I thought I'd kick off by asking you a couple of questions.
Okay.
I think people sometimes confuse the idea of multicultural with multiculturalism. What exactly does multiculturalism mean?
That's a really good starting point, Mervyn, because a lot of confusion and debate about multiculturalism is, I think, due to misunderstandings about what it actually means. So some people use the term merely to refer to cultural diversity. But I think it's less about cultural diversity per se and more about how we manage or respond to cultural diversity. So if you ask the question, is New Zealand multicultural? Certainly in terms of our population makeup, we are. As we all know, almost 1 in 4 are overseas born. And in fact, New Zealand is one of the most culturally diverse countries in the OECD. But you have to go beyond just describing population composition and ask the questions that pertain to, do we have policies that support or respond in positive ways to the culturally diverse makeup of our country? And what are the characteristics of our society more broadly? So my thinking on this is very much influenced by Professor John Berry from Queen's University in Canada. He has been studying multiculturalism for 4 decades. And I'm in total agreement with him when he talks about a multicultural society is one that has, I suppose, 3 primary features. First of all, it is culturally diverse, but that diversity is appreciated and positively valued. Mm-hmm. Secondly, that all cultures, all ethnic or ethnocultural groups in a society are able to a very large extent to maintain their traditional cultural heritage and language. So cultural maintenance is a key element of multicultural society. And thirdly, that all of the ethnocultural groups within a nation are able to participate in a fair and equitable way in that society. It's really important that we have both the maintenance dimension and the participation dimension. Because if you have one but not the other, you don't have a multicultural society. So here's where I would jump in and say, multiculturalism hasn't failed in France, Germany, and the UK. They've never had it. It's never been tested. Because if you have an assimilationist policy as Germany does, you don't really permit the cultural maintenance in any meaningful way. Alternatively, the UK actually has quite a lot of multicultural policy, but I don't think they have succeeded in the fair and equitable participation domain. So you can't have cultural maintenance with groups living in parallel societies. We have to all come together, understand and accommodate each other, and it has to be, two-way interaction between the newcomers who may be more culturally diverse than members of the original receiving society.
Thank you for that. I think that's a very articulate way of unpacking the topic of multiculturalism. I think one of the concerns we've been reading a lot about and hearing a lot about is the fact that if you enable and support ethnic minority communities to maintain their cultural identity, their religion, their faith, and you actually encourage it strongly, then you get these communities living in parallel lives where they're living in their suburb or the area that they occupy, they do their own things, and then they don't connect with everybody else. Is that something we should be concerned about in New Zealand?
I think it's definitely something we should be concerned about in a number of ways. And I think, in my view, you've very much described the situation in the UK. So you have got the maintenance and even the encouragement of maintaining traditional cultural heritage. But you can't just have that one part of the equation. You have to have interaction across the groups. So there has to be infrastructure, systems, ways of bringing the groups together in a meaningful way. One that promotes not only understanding of the diversity and appreciation, but also demands reasonable accommodation. So, for example, in New Zealand, and I'm very proud of this, we know from some of our own research at the center, from a survey of over 2,000 New Zealand households, 89% agreed with the statement that it is a good thing for any society to be made up of different races, religions, and cultures. That was significantly higher than the agreement in comparable surveys in Australia and 15 European Union countries. So in terms of the principle, I think we're starting on firm ground in New Zealand because I think that diversity is appreciated. But it's no good to say, in principle, I appreciate diversity, it's great to have it, on one hand. And then on the other hand, as long as it doesn't mean I have to do anything to respond to it. So if you say diversity's great, but I don't want a synagogue, mosque, or temple in my neighborhood, what does that mean?
Yes.
So you have to, all groups have to be able to accommodate difference in a reasonable fashion. If I value it, I have to accommodate to a certain extent.
Yes, I'm aware of studies in Canada as well that show that people appreciate ethnic diversity, but sometimes not in their backyard, where it becomes very personal.
That's right.
So I'm going to take this topic a little bit deeper, Professor Ward. In terms of what you said before, it's good to allow people to preserve their cultural heritage and identity and encourage that. But you say that people need equal participation, which is the other very important component of multiculturalism.
Yes.
But in countries like New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, where this is a hot topic, some people would say, we already have all those rights to participate. There are human rights laws, there are equal employment opportunity policies within government. People have almost equal rights, except for if you're a resident or citizen, there's a minor difference. But people have almost full rights across the board. So isn't that already the platform for people to participate? Does that not mean we already have multiculturalism in a manner of speaking?
I think we fail here. yes, we have the rights and the protections, but how does it play out in reality? Which brings me actually to what I kind of call the third form of multiculturalism, which is everyday multiculturalism. How do each of us experience our everyday reality in terms of the culturally diverse people or institutions or organizations we come into contact with? And the reality of the situation is when we look at equity or equality or across different ethnic groups, we find it's not there. For example, Māori are disadvantaged on almost every social and health indicator you can think of. Lower median incomes, less home ownership, higher levels of imprisonment, more mental health difficulties. This is not because Māori are in any way
deficit or something.
Yeah, it's not because they're in deficit. It's because they're not competing as other groups on an equal playing field. You find the same patterns when we look at research on immigrants in New Zealand. Overseas-born Kiwis or residents in New Zealand have on average higher levels of education than native-born New Zealanders. But they're also more likely to be unemployed or underemployed. So it's fine to say that we have these fundamental protections, which we do, but in reality they're not playing out that way, so that we're not really competing on equal playing fields here.
So, absolutely, I think that's been very much a heart of the debate as well, the issue of disadvantage tending to be a perennial issue despite policy frameworks and laws that protect equal rights. There are some countries that have formal multiculturalism legislation or policy frameworks, and yet they tend to fare worse than New Zealand that doesn't have a formal policy as such around it. Does that not militate against the argument that we might need one? What do you think about that?
I'd be curious to know, just to help me out with an example here, as to which countries would you cite as having the policies but also faring worse?
I would say Australia has had multiculturalism policies in various states, and I think recently the federal government affirmed that. But Australia, I think a lot of people would say, has got worse race relations, worse statistics in relation to Aboriginal people, for example. So that's one example, I suppose, that's been raised. Yes.
Yes. Well, I certainly think that Aboriginal peoples in Australia are severely disadvantaged. But okay, being the professor, I'm going to put on my academic hat momentarily.
That would
and
help.
I'm going to cite a bit of research here. Again, at Queen's University, there is a center that studies multiculturalism and multicultural policy. And they do this, they use the term multiculturalism broadly, and if you look at their research, they have one stream of research which is about multicultural policies for immigrant minorities, and another stream of research which is multicultural policies for Aboriginal or Indigenous peoples. If you look at New Zealand in terms of its policies with respect to immigrant minorities, you will find that we do fairly well in terms of the OECD countries. We don't do quite as well as Australia, you have mentioned, Canada, and one or two of the Scandinavian countries. But we do pretty well. Where we fall down, and the way they determine the extent of a country's multicultural policies. So they look at things like, is there an official parliamentary affirmation of multiculturalism, so an explicit multicultural policy, or is there a ministry or a body that implements multicultural policy? Is there multicultural education or curricula in the school? Is there ethnic representation in the media? Are there funding? Are ethnic organizations funded? Are language programs funded? These types of issues. Where New Zealand actually falls down here is on the official affirmation. It's exactly the issue that you have brought up. So when you talk about New Zealand perhaps not having that, but doing better than some other countries, they do meet multicultural criteria on other counts, which in some ways compensate for the lack of a formal multicultural policy. And the reason I say in some ways compensates, as opposed to, I would be reluctant to say, therefore we don't have to worry about it in New Zealand. For ethnic communities, they often look, well, all of us, we look to the government to lead by example. We want to know, we want to see New Zealand's values reflected in government policy. We may wish to see an explicit statement that multiculturalism is valued in this country, and we support it. And engaging in the things we, to some extent, already do, but have that more formalized and let the government lead by example here. So I don't know if I kind of beat around the bush on that question, but it's the policy, the official affirmation is one aspect of a bigger multicultural policy understanding.
In a sense, Professor Ward, what you're saying is, even if we had legislation, policies that promote equal participation, and also the attendant element you mentioned of preservation of cultural identity, it still might be important for ethnic communities to have a sense that the government is showing leadership by affirming those things in a very firm way through multicultural policies. That's what I'm saying, because in one sense, multiculturalism, the everyday multiculturalism, it's how you live it and your everyday experience. You want to know that you belong. You want to know you can be who you are and belong and be accepted and appreciated. And a multicultural policy is a very clear statement, is that's how we do things in New Zealand. I think what has happened in New Zealand, I think the intentions, the government intentions have always been good and honorable. But I think, and I'm probably going to get hit over the head when I say this, that when you look at the, broadly speaking, when you try to look at the big picture in New Zealand, I think the way we have responded to issues of race and ethnicity have been ad hoc, piecemeal, and there is no grand vision or strategic planning. It's like we introduce this or we introduce that, and very well it may have many positive effects, but there is no grand vision. So you're talking about a sense of coherence around the topic of identity and diversity and so on, rather than ad hoc, piecemeal solutions and so on as things happen.
Yes, yes. I would like to see the master plan, so to speak.
That's a point perhaps we should pick up after this session as well. I think another thorny area of this debate is one I raised earlier on. So if we decided in New Zealand that this was a good idea, that we needed a multicultural framework of some kind, whether in legislation or just policy without legislation, what does that mean for Maori? What about the bicultural foundations of this country? I know that there is a debate going on about a treaty-based multiculturalism framework. Would you care to comment on that? How would this work out in New Zealand, given that the unique paradigm that we have around the Treaty of Waitangi?
It's very important to recognize history. It's very important to acknowledge New Zealand's the unique characteristics of New Zealand, and it is critically important to recognize the treaty and honor its principles. I don't think myself that there is any inherent incompatibility between the treaty principles and the principles of multiculturalism. Let's go back to what are the principles of multiculturalism. The principles of multiculturalism, which is a broader construct, mean that each group is able, to a large extent, to maintain their traditional heritage culture and to participate in a fair and equitable way in the wider society. Those are the fundamental principles. Now let's look at the treaty. The treaty is an agreement between Māori and the Crown. The Crown is the government. The government represents all of us. So essentially, we look at the treaty as an agreement between Māori and Tauiwi, those of us who are not Māori. And the treaty affords rights and responsibilities, but essentially the way the principles of the treaty have been summarized, they talk about kawanatanga, which is governorship by the Crown. It talks about rangatiratanga, which allows Māori a degree of self-determination and certainly grants them the protection of their taonga, their treasures, both material and cultural. So in the treaty, it's a very clear statement that Māori culture lives and thrives in this country. That's the agreement between Māori and all of the rest of us. Equality for all citizens, third treaty principle. That's very similar to what I've been saying is a principle of multiculturalism, fair and equitable participation.
Equal rights for everyone.
Equal rights for everyone. And then we have reasonable cooperation between Māori, between iwi and the Crown, between Māori and Tauiwi, and we have redress of past injustices. So for all of those times where the treaty has been dishonored, we have mechanisms to redress those injustices. So I don't see any conflict then between the treaty principles and the principles of multiculturalism. I think where we get into trouble, it's our own language. Because we often refer to the lived experience of the treaty as biculturalism. And as soon as you say biculturalism on one hand and multiculturalism on the other hand, it's set up to sound like the two are in conflict with each other. But think about what biculturalism really means. Again, I'm going to be hit over the head for this. I don't think we were ever bicultural. What I mean by that is Māori, things Māori, our indigenous people, our tangata whenua, that part of New Zealand, culture and experience will always be there. It has to be there. But when you think about what was the other culture in a bicultural relationship, the Crown was never really one single culture.
That's right.
It has been dominated by Pākehā, particularly New Zealanders of British, Irish descent. But that has never really been the only other culture here. So I don't
The Chinese have been here for a long time, and Muslims and
the Indians have been here for a very long time. And the Pacific, well, more recently, admittedly, the Pacific migration of the 60s and 70s, all of this before, we changed our immigration policies in the late 80s, early 90s, which changed the face of our nation. So in one generation, we have gone from a largely Māori European with smatterings of Chinese, Indian, Pacific peoples and other European groups to a highly diverse nation. So I suppose that's how I see the relationship. But the problem is the language, because biculturalism, multiculturalism, then it sounds like the two are at odds with each other.
Almost sounds like, again, that theme of a bridge need to be built, rather than people seeing things as opposites that are competing interests and so on.
That's right.
Needs to be focused on. Professor Ward's mentioned a couple of times that when she raises a couple of issues as she has, that she might get hit on the head. And I think that simply symbolizes how difficult this debate is. But we in the Office of Ethnic Affairs often say that in a diverse society, we have to be able to talk about the hard things, the things that are kind of difficult to approach because people want to stay away from them in case they damage relationships or cause tensions that people don't want. I'm going to now open the floor for you to pose some questions to Professor Ward on this topic, because I think it's something that we need to debate, and debate from an informed position. That's why we're having this session with Professor Ward. So I'd like to take a few questions, but I think we'll do it in clusters. We get a few questions at a time, and then maybe 2 or 3, and then Professor Ward will respond, and we'll have about, I think, 10 minutes. Thank you. Sir.
Quite
Mike's
low
coming.
From the Canterbury Chinese Association. I like your explanation on biculturalism, Maori, and then the others, the rest on the other side. There's a good explanation, and I've been waiting for. And I'm very pleased with that, because I always ask that question. And I'd just like to ask you a question. Although you accept that New Zealand practice multiculturalism, we have diverse culture, we allow them to practice their religion, their custom, languages, and so on. So in terms of definition, we actually practicing multiculturalism. What we haven't got is enshrined that in our constitution. So my question is it worthwhile to push for this in the current review on New Zealand constitution, or there are some other means where we could affirm that New Zealand society is a multicultural society? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question. Taz?
Thank you, Professor. That was very informative. Just around the issue of equality and participation, obviously we have lots of cultural events in our city, so there's no problem with participation on a cultural level. But we were just talking earlier in our session about the equality, especially in employment and participating in business and the things that also give one a sense of belonging and meaning. But my question to you, based on what you understand about the predominantly Pākehā New Zealand psyche, or what causes this one-way street approach of we'll stand at our window and enjoy your cultures, but just don't come into my house and share a meal with me or have what I have in my house. Well, what is some of the thinking behind this, and what is informed from what you understand through research? Maybe that could be helpful.
Professor Ward, I think those two questions span from the Constitution to lived reality in neighborhoods, as it were.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'll answer the second question first, and then I'll come back to the review, if I may. Well, people like to pick and choose. So often when we ask New Zealand what you like most about cultural diversity, it's the food. So facetiously I would say, no, actually I do want to come into your house and share food with you.
Our food's great.
Food's great. Yeah. And secondly, in one of our surveys, we found they also very much liked the idea of having multiple holidays. So holidays across ethnic groups. But more seriously, I think it's often the case that people, we've all heard this, if you're coming to my country, you need to fit in, and if you don't like the way we do things, go home. That's not a really very helpful attitude, especially since we're inviting the immigrants into the country here, and then saying, if you don't like it, go home. But I think it's a complex picture. One of the things I hadn't mentioned is like what makes multiculturalism work, or when does it work properly? And it works properly when each group feels secure in their own identity, in their own place. And that goes for the largest and the most dominant groups as well. So sometimes these groups feel threatened. We heard the concern that it was perceived in Christchurch that the new immigrants will be taking away the jobs. That's a very commonly sensitive issue. So anything that enhances threat or reduces a sense of security is problematic. Also, I think a lot of people are resistant to change. So it's like, yeah, I think this is great, but I don't want to have to change for it to be around me. So it's like, just, that's really good, but don't inconvenience me. Now, Canada, I will use them as an example, although it's very unusual in terms of the world stage. As part of their multiculturalism policy, they also have the principle of what is called reasonable accommodation. So that means everybody both the diverse minority groups as well as the larger members of the receiving society, everyone has to reasonably accommodate each other. And it's put out there, and like, this is the expectation. The example I heard quoted recently was a conservative Jewish school built next to a gym with clear glass with women in gym clothes on the machine, whatever. The educators in the school preferred not to have their students ogling the women in their gym costumes. And so they came to a reasonable compromise where the gym, they frosted the windows, but the school contributed to the cost of doing that. So you can see both sides compromise. Neither may get everything that they want, but multiculturalism is about compromise, and that's something I think we have to keep in mind.
You know, Professor Ward, something I saw on television which was very interesting some time ago was a council planning meeting where a resource consent process was happening for a brothel and then a group of refugees wanting to set up a little mosque with a teaching school and so on. And the first one went through straight away like that. And the second one, the public in the community there was refuting actively that refugee group wanting to set up a mosque. So sometimes it's really ironic, the kind of things that happen in the community as a result of debates around identity, race, and culture, and so on. I think you were going to comment on the Constitution as well.
On the first question. First of all, you know, if we ask the question, is New Zealand, or indeed is any society a multicultural society, I think multiculturalism is aspirational. We're in a process moving towards it. We're not there yet. I'm not sure that any place is really there yet, because the equity part of the equation is usually problematic, even when the maintenance part is acknowledged. But getting back to your question about the constitutional review, I've said on one hand that government should lead by example, but I also believe that you have to have a bottom-up as well as a top-down initiatives. And again, then you get the bridge that meets in the middle.
Absolutely.
Okay, so with respect to the bottom-up and the grassroots movement, yes, I think absolutely this is the time with the constitutional review to make your concerns known. None of us know how the review is going to pan out, but this is a very significant issue. I see a lot of merit in an explicit acknowledgement of the value of diversity and multiculturalism in this country. I would say work on it, definitely. In fact, this is good because you give me, again, the academic, you give me the opportunity to use this quote that I ripped out of the newspaper on the flight this morning, totally different context, but Barack Obama, who has been visiting Israel, says, "Speaking as a politician, I can promise you this. Political leaders will not take risks if the people do not demand that they do. You must create the change that you want to see." Go for it.
Well, actually, Professor Ward, I think that's the theme of this conference is communities need to take a lead. You know, you have power. Unlock that power. That's what this conference is about. We have time for a couple more questions, and I wish we had a lot more time because this is such a meaty debate. But we've only got time for a couple of questions. I've got somebody with the beady eye on me, keeping my eye on the time. Sir, you, and then lady at the back with the hand up in the grey jacket.
Hi. Hello?
It's on.
Oh, okay. Henry from the Chinese Madu Cultural Association. I just want to ask you, how can you encourage self-empowering actions by the disadvantaged cultural communities themselves to improve their reputation, interest, and respect from the collective community, as opposed to having rules to enforce everyone to accept them?
And can we have the other question for the lady at the back there, please, as well? Yep, that lady there.
Lindsay Talangi Niue community. You talk about cultural maintenance. my views are I agree with cultural maintenance, but within the law of the land. And so over the years, there has been media reports about, for example, female circumcision, underage marriages. So what are your thoughts around within the law of the land?
Okay. Again, I'll answer the questions in reverse order, if I may. That's a really important question. And I think if you listen to me carefully, I used phrases like are largely able to maintain their cultures, because there are always going to be these kinds of issues. There may be small number of them, but they're nonetheless important issues, and the rule of law is the rule of law. So there are things that we will not tolerate in New Zealand. There are practices that might be expected or even encouraged in other cultural contexts, such as honor killings. We will not tolerate that in New Zealand. Sometimes it is difficult to know where to draw that line. Sometimes it comes down to a case-by-case or issue-by-issue basis. I am not suggesting that we throw the rule of law away. So, I can't give you one formula for how you sort every particular issue out, but absolutely we have to adhere to respect the rule of law. Yep.
And the other question, I think, Professor Ward, about...
Oh, empowering. Start small, start within your community. Start
Good advice.
With relationships, building within community relationships. When you feel like those networks are strong and vibrant, start building networks across communities. Intercultural contact, the value of intercultural contact cannot be overestimated. It is really important. However, having said that, to get the best out of intercultural contact, it is preferable if you can work under circumstances that are equal status. So if you have intercultural contact with big status differentials, that may not prove to be to result in positive outcomes. Preferably working together with members of other communities in a cooperative fashion on goals of mutual interest. That's a very good way to empower communities and make progress on the issues that are important to you. And just slowly, in a sustained fashion and systematically. And you will get there. And look to the young people. The migrant and refugee communities are often largely at the younger end of the age range. They're our future. Work with the youth.
It was great to see questions from young people, by the way. I've got a sharp sign there saying time up. So we have to wrap up. I really hope that this conversation, which was far from sufficient really to unpack this really complex topic of multiculturalism, that it has planted some seeds for you to think about, whatever your position may be. The important thing, I think, from our point of view in ethnic affairs, is the bottom-up power and action that Professor Ward just described. And I also want to thank you, Professor Ward. One of the things I really enjoyed working with you over the years is not only do you have knowledge, you have wisdom as well. And that's a rare commodity sometimes, I think. So I want to thank you very much for participating in this debate, and thank you all as well. My apologies that we couldn't answer, pick up all your questions, but Professor Ward will be here for a while, and you know where she is, Victoria University. Feel free to engage and with us as well. So can I thank Professor Ward very much, and thank you all as well.
Thanks, Mervyn. That was good.
Thank you.